Hello.
The idea for this one, Jules, initially, when we talked about this when we're walking, we were talking about a course specifically for trauma, and we didn't really identify whether that was for clients or people, and we kind of expanded the idea of trauma as in not in the conventional, your life was in danger stuff. That's whatever someone's regarding as traumatic for them.
Yeah, we broke that down into different possibilities and options and thoughts, and about the traditional definition of trauma, as you say, your life in danger, and the more modern uptake of people's lives, of stressful lives, of things that can still be very traumatic, an impact on people in different ways through different times.
Absolutely, a divorce, a harsh comment.
Internet bullying, workplace bullying can all be lead to very traumatic.
Car breaks down, late for a meeting.
Stressful.
Yeah.
Traumatic. It's the individual, how the individual it's not about us putting any labels on anything, or what labels is the last thing we want for people anyway. But it's more about the organicness and the open acceptance for me of if something's going to be useful to a person, to help them.
So still keeping this very sort of openly flowy. We went on, the way I'm remembering it, we went on from this idea of a trauma release training to something that was a lot more bigger scope, and keeping, I think, those same ideas, maybe around freedom or changing thoughts or exploring what this is in different ways, all around changing meanings, changing perceptions. And you mentioned Brené Brown.
Yeah, I mentioned quite a lot of different things. We mentioned Brené Brown, we mentioned ACT, we mentioned trauma resolution from different fields that are already established. We talked about acceptance, we talked about change, we talked about no change, we talked about reframing, we talked about doing something and doing nothing. As usual, our conversations are wide and varied.
And that's the title that I'm remembering. We've got this idea, and I wanted, when we were doing the trauma one, I didn't get the email from you with the 360 title.
Right, okay.
So I'd love to hear that again, because you did say you're going to email me. And following that, we've got the idea. Got that idea of movement and no change, and change and no movement, which I think you suggested half, and I might have suggested the other half. And that brought out for me ideas from Krishnamurti, from Bohm, from Robert Scar, from any of the kind of semi-Buddhist or semi-Hindu ideas about the psychological aspects, but also accepting trauma in some sense is held in the body, and that you can't really take just psychology without physiology. For me, that it's a great way of categorizing, but these don't exist separately.
It's a bit like saying the mind without the body and the body without the mind.
And that idea, I don't know if you've heard the joke, it comes from a Carry On film, so I heard it. There's a little chap and he swallowed some loose change, and they're waiting for, and the doctor says that there's been no change yet. But you can assume there's been movement there and not the change they were looking for. Kind of like doing the same old and hoping something different's going to happen, and surprise, it generally doesn't.
And there's also there's the change and no change, movement and no movement. And yet there's also the perceptions and the it reminds me of the parable of the 6 blind men and the elephant. There's the 6 blind men, and they've been told that an elephant's coming to town, and they've never
seen one.
Obviously, they've never seen one. They've never been anywhere near an elephant. They've got no indication, no no frame of reference, so to speak. What on an elephant? It's this big weird thing that makes a noise, we've been told. So they were really excited because everybody in the village is going to see this elephant. So of course they don't want to be left out. So they go along. And afterwards, they get together and they describe the elephant. And one person's like, it's like a wily twig that bends and is a bit wishy, and he's been feeling the tail.
All right.
Another man being like, it's like a big tree. It's really solid and firm, and I don't know where you've gotten this huge tree, because I've been feeling the leg. And then one, no, it's like a big thick piece of material, like leather. It's really flappy and really strong and powerful. You're feeling the ear. And then you've got one man who's like, no, it's immeasurable. It's so soft and smooth and hard. You've been feeling the tusk. And each one of them had their own opinion of the part of the elephant that they assumed was the elephant, because they could only feel their part. And how often can we always get embroiled or think that, trapped in the belief that there's only the leg, because we focus on that part of an experience of something, there's only that part. So if we could open things up, we can look at the bigger picture of things, and just by opening something up, what movement, what change, what's not going to change. Again, it's interesting. The differences, the options that are pretty limitless to when people think that they're in a fixed position, a fixed whirlwind, or something I see quite often. When you're in the eye of the storm, it's pretty hard to see outside of the whirlwind going on the outside of you. If you're in the eye of that, you might feel like you're calm and you can see what you can see around you, but you can't see what's in the top, and you can't see what's outside of that. And yet if you could see what was outside of it and see that, this whirlwind's going to pass and everything else is still going to be around, that could be quite useful at times as well.
So I'm guessing that just the way I'm
picking my translating,
I think we're seeing the same thing. It's avoiding reductionism, avoiding the buckets, as Sapolsky puts it, bringing in, as in Wilber's I, we, and it, all those different aspects from the material world, the various different cultures, methods, models, maps, plans, and the interior aspects. Yeah.
That's what I said.
That's what you said. And that's almost what I heard.
Almost what you heard, with a little bit different as well.
Yeah.
And this conversation is a prime example of having a conversation, saying one thing, hearing another. Translate. Everything comes through. We translate. We experience everything in our way, because obviously that's all we've got. And yet being led, I'm off. I'm off again.
Your hands sound really smooth when you're sanding them together like that.
The value in sharing, the value in listening, the value in stepping into another person's experience, perspective, learning. Can't help but, like the change that hasn't been no change yet, can't help but still have changes going on levels that can't be seen.
I think I want to say two things on that. I recommended a book on this current NLP practitioner, and it's Hayakawa's Language and Thought and Action. It's a very old book. I think the first edition came out in 1939, and it's brilliant. We know that sort of aphorism in NLP of description, interpretation, evaluation. The way he is suggesting that, to me, it's the same model. It's reports, inferences, and judgments. So the report, in any sense, is something that is verifiable and like factual.
Yes.
The inference is the meanings we make, and then the judgments basically says judgment stop thought. So I don't know if you've ever listened to those David Bohm, Krishnamurti dialogues that I love. And I think I love them mostly for the methodology, not necessarily what they're talking about. It is a very open, and if you can just accept this idea as a possibility, what are the results that could come from that? What benefits could accrue, as opposed to closing something straight down, going, God doesn't exist. So there's this openness of being able to step in, like what you just said, to another perspective. You don't have to live from it, you don't have to inhabit it. What could be different if you'd willing to experience this just for a little while?
Just step in and see what happens. Take away, postpone, put away for just a few moments in time your judgments, your inferences, and just see. Because, you know, if we take it back down to the simplest of things, if children, you know, when, like, I've got a daughter, and when I've got 2 daughters, and they're both quite fussy.
Where would they get that from?
No idea where they get that from.
I'm sure if I had children, they'd be equally fussy.
And yet, if we come to food,
Homer Simpson moment.
Yeah, food. This Christmas we had family around, and we'd it was like a seafood start, everything with lots of different types of seafood. And Katie normally doesn't like seafood, and she was like, "Can I try one of those prawns?" I was like, "Of course you can, darling, help yourself." And she was like, "That's quite nice." And I was like, "Can I have another one?" I went, "Help yourself." And you know, the amount of times previously I'd said, "Would you like to try one?" And no. Well, that's she thought I was trying. I've never forced anything on her food-wise, but it's always there for an option if she wants to try it.
Of course.
But then she decided that, oh, I think I'll give it a go and see what happens.
And it would be ridiculous to say it's because you were in that environment. It's because she never wanted them before. It's because they looked appealing this time, because you got to peel a prawn. Who knows how they were? You can't separate meaning from a context and what goes on. Because, you know, like, if you're looking at me, there is a background to me, and there's things behind, and I'm sitting on a chair. Like, I could be sitting on a stool, I could be fibbing, I could be on my honkers, I could be on an inflatable cushion, who knows?
Could be on your bouncy ball.
I'm very well balanced.
You're welcome.
Can't separate that context, that perception. And I was saying 2 things, which I'm going to come to the second one in a bit because I've remembered it now while we've been exploring. There's also this idea of the map and the territory. The NLP thing, that's Korzybski's, that's mentioned again, Big Sam Hayakawa's book, is the territory is very different from the map. The map's your internal representation, and sometimes you can get a dodgy map.
Very much
or you
so.
can make your own maps up to completely hold in your own beliefs that don't necessarily work and well or true.
Pretty sure all of us have had a sat nav that's taken us down the wrong route at one time or another.
I haven't, and I've only used the sat nav about 4 or 5 times in my life.
Right. Well, you know, like
I get what you mean. I know people who have.
Sat nav I've got in my car, you see, it's got different options. I think probably most of them have, but I just obviously know mine. It's got the fastest route. It's got a toll-free route. It's got the longest route. So depending on which one I choose, depends on what way it takes me.
Yeah.
And I've seen me, you know, if I don't change any of the settings, I just put my directions in and go. And then I've seen me go absolutely 5, 6, 7 miles out my way from somewhere. You know, when I come back, I've just like going this way instead.
That's why I don't need a sat nav. I tend to get lost for a bit.
I'm great at getting lost. I always end up finding my way home eventually.
Oh, of course.
Getting lost half the adventure, half the time, though, isn't it? As long as I'm not going to meet somebody who I said I'd be there for a certain time for, because
yeah, that's different.
But if I'm just having a day of wonders, then yeah, there's no problem with that. And though, but we can have our maps, and we can maybe think we've got it set on one thing, and that'll take us down one route. And perhaps, you know, if we just don't put those settings in, if we don't look at those settings, who knows what route we'll take instead.
And there's a time and a place to get there.
Yeah, there is a time and a place to get there. And sometimes, though, you can keep going down the wrong way and the wrong way and the wrong way without realizing how the settings are. without realizing that you can make a small just adjustment, and it can take you on a totally different path. And if you go to a different road, odds are you're going to come to a different destination.
Sometimes those very small changes and adjustments have massive differences in effect. Not always. No. That's one of my favorite things is chaos theory, the idea of a butterfly effect. Everything, if you could model it mathematically, which you can't, if you could have a model of you've got these variables, which is your behaviors, your actions, your thoughts, that produce this experience in the world. And the idea chaos theory, the butterfly idea is, and it's not as crazy or far-fetched as it sounds, that if a butterfly breaks wind, I think they say flaps its wings, but I'll make it more memorable, breaks wind somewhere, that tiny little air current could change another air current, or you could leave your house in the morning 5 minutes late because you've had to do things. You miss your bus. You don't end up in a workplace that was destroyed by an act of God. It's that kind of idea where little changes can, not necessarily always, but really produce very different outcomes. Very different.
And then there's also the fact that sometimes you don't actually need to do anything different. Still have a different result.
That's the change with no movement.
Yeah. I wonder how many times, again, if I go back to Katie, she will go and do, we'll talk about the homework. She's just got a fixed routine. She comes and she does her homework, and we sit at the table and we settle down and we do it at a certain time, so it's done and it's out of the way. And she's got that routine. She does that, she does that, she does that. Sometimes it's done in a second without her thinking about it. Sometimes she just doesn't do anything. She doesn't do anything different. And she'll just look at me and she'll just go, and she doesn't know what's different. She's got her question. She knows her homework. She's been doing it all at school that day. And yet, even though she's not changing anything, she feels totally different about what she's doing. She's set her little routine that she thinks is how she does it, and that's what she's happy with. But she knows that something's vastly different, even though she knows, the questions are things that she knows a million times. She's done it a million times. She's just in a different place herself.
Yeah.
Because we are in different places ourselves all the time.
Yeah, always changing from moment to second. It's whether you're aware of it, whether the results do something slightly different.
How many times have we perhaps drove down a road and somebody's like cut out in front of us, and maybe one day we'll turn around and just go, or he must be in a hurry. Yeah. Another time we're like absolutely ranting and raving about it. How much, is it the other person that's done that? Is it our story that we're telling ourselves, that we're blaming somebody else for doing that? How much of it's our responsibility, and how much of our actions from having that reaction to something, how much of them actually are how we want to be as people? How much of them are actually who we want to be, and how we like to live our life, and how we are happy and content, and how many of our behaviours, going into behaviours which have to smoothly or not so smoothly went into, how many of them are actually closing down the routes on the adventures that we could go on?
There's a whole story list. I may share a couple of them here. That on the essence is when someone does something, like your reaction to them is your reaction to you. That's a reflection of your, if it's just a woomph and there it's out there, that's like a mirror mind in Zen. It reflects what's there, and that's reflecting you. And there's
how much easier is it to blame somebody else?
Precisely. That damned fool cut me up.
If he hadn't have pulled out to me, if she hadn't have pulled out to me, I wouldn't be feeling like that.
So that's something. I think Robert Keegan's got a model like this, a 3-step, 5-step. But the essence of it is something like you're very dependent on other people for your emotions, your feelings, your happiness. Then it comes to quite dependent on yourself, self-sufficient for your actions, your behaviors. And then there's this, I think it just fits so nicely into, I think it's a Hindu and certainly a Zen and a Buddhist in different words. It's the theory of interdependence. The idea is Indra's net, where you've got a net with jewels where all the little strings cross, and those jewels are presumably total crystal clear reflective, and it reflects everything else.
I've had a few conversations recently about dependency, about people's self-image, of self-belief, that like if somebody else thinks something good of them, that they feel validated.
Yeah, me too.
As opposed to just having the belief that they know what they're doing, you know, they're good enough, they've got it, they can do it. And again, whether it's we've sort of veered away from trauma to a degree, which is what we did in our conversation, which is why we opened it up so much wider. It's about, or there is a use for anybody who is finding themselves in a place where they're not, they know they can, whether they can feel it in their body, whether it's in their mind, whether it's in their actions, all of the above, or they're focusing on one or all. It's about looking at, again, taking themselves or taking ourselves, because I do this as well, out of the, for the want of a better word, the net. You just use the net. We can get caught in nets without even realizing we're in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And nets can be quite binding. And if you don't even know that you're being bound by something, that you're in a net, sometimes just even taking the first look around and seeing what's happening is going to be useful.
Well, you know, a net's one of the only things that if you cut a hole in it, you've actually got less holes.
A little bit like I'm doing something at the weekend, and I've just ordered some Chinese finger traps.
Oh, cool. I used to get those from the joke shop, and the more you struggle, the more you struggle.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I'm going to be. That's what everyone's going to be taking away a little one from the presentation, and I was going to bring some in for us.
Brilliant. I think that's a good idea. That really. Go ahead.
No, I think you're going to go where I was going to go anyway. So yeah.
Well, I really like Alan Watts, and Steve, our friend, he tried to get me to listen to Alan Watts for about, I think it was about 6 years. And I'm like, no. And then when I did, I just came in and went, Steve, I love this guy speaking. He's an interest. And Steve just went, yeah, told you, and just walked away. So one of the things Alan Watts comes out, he's got like a book out called The Wisdom of Anxiety. He talks about people that are trying to improve the self. He talks about how do you choose the right person to help you. Who is the authority in that? If you're coming to see someone coming on a course, it's you who is coming that's given that authority. This is an interdependency.
Yeah.
When he's talking about like trying to improve the self or trying to change a thought pattern, that thought pattern is still a thought. How do you change your thought with a thought? How do you change the ego that's not physical? It's a piece of map that like, oh, my ego isn't strong, or where is this going? There's a kind of a useful insanity of attempting to do this until, without movement, there's a change. I don't know if you've read the Don Juan books. Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah,
They're pretty cool. It's about a guy that meets up with an older guy who becomes his spiritual teacher, and they have all kind of interesting adventures. As far as I know, they're all purely fiction, but a lot of people took them for real. And he's kind of asking about his teacher's younger days and his teachers, like when my blood was too hot to do things. He led this kind of wild hedonistic life. And he went, well, how did you change? How did you change? And he went, you just drop it at one point. That's it. He wasn't expecting it to change. And, I'm also going along the line with, there's a lot of useful processes, tools that you can apply to create the differences. It could be effortlessly effortful or effortfully effortless. Yeah.
The first step, though, isn't it? It's being curious.
Not judging.
No. Curiosity, I believe, is one of the biggest gifts that we have.
Yeah.
The ability to get really interested and really curious about something. Even if we've got a judgment that, it's not going to work, let's just put that to one side, but let's just have a look. Let's pull it apart. Let's see what we can do with it. And a little bit like the trauma, the 360-degree spherical.
That's that. What? Get that out. 360.
It was a 360 spherical. I'll have it on the paper.
You'll have it on the paper.
It'll be in my book there. My book's upstairs. It's upstairs in my book. I can get it if you want to wait a second.
No, I'm good.
Okay. And it was the construction, the deconstruction.
See, you've remembered now.
And the reconstruction.
That's it.
So that was a case of, what we do, how we do it. What we do, how we do it, and what we can change, and what we're going to put back together about that. And we can do that with change. We can do that with no change. We can do that with curiosity. We can do that by doing nothing, because it's not us that's doing it. And we can lead the way, and we can guide the way, and we can increase curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, by doing little things like this.
Yeah.
Spherical transformation. So we've got a sphere, because, if we start in a place, we discussed it, didn't we? It was a 360-degree transformation. That was something along the lines that we were doing, trauma resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, that's like a flat, it's more of an embodied, it's more of a spherical, a full, a whole.
Yeah.
And this is why we come up with spherical instead of degrees. But it was 360 still, because it's coming around, whether it's looking at a full journey, whether it's just turning our beliefs completely on their head, our behaviours completely around, our outcomes completely around. But it's still being back to where we were, but just.
Yeah. Change and no movement, or movement and no change.
We can be in exactly the same place and be a completely different person, or have a completely different outlook on a specific thing.
Yeah.
Oh, much wider one. There's always change.
And
no change and movement.
As long as you don't need any loose change first.
But there'll still be some change.
Jackpot. Now, that second thing that I said I was going to say.
Yeah.
You've read this book. It's Strangers to Ourselves, Tim Wilson, which is a real interesting book about the adaptive unconscious. But some aspect in that, and I've been looking into this because it's come up in a few of the things that I've read, and it's called a TAT test. That's a thematic apperception test. Do you know the Rorschach test where you look at blobs and see things in them?
Yeah. See what you see.
Yeah. See what you see. See what you see. Yeah. Divest yourself as absolutely crazy, because that is not what you're seeing at all. The TAT test's in a similar vein. Mm-hmm. So you get like a picture or a cartoon. That's where I've heard this recently. Robert Anton Wilson, when he became manager and editor for Playboy a lot of years ago, he's passed away now, sadly. The person that was offering the job was really into like the psychological test, and so he had to do this. And he went, I just went for it. I didn't hold anything back. So he's got this great story. But the gist of it is, you'll see a picture, a still picture. You're asked to look at it for a couple of minutes, and then like it's going to have people in it, maybe 2, 3, 4 people of all different ages, gender, etc. You're asked to look at it, study it, and you're invited for the next 10 minutes to write the story, beginning, middle, and end of that scene, of those characters, their own beliefs, their values, where it's going, maybe even how they got there and how this plays out. So this is a beautiful demonstration of you're going to make meanings if you're prodded in that way. And as humans, we all have stories, our story, your story, history, her history, and the meanings, the interpretations we make from what could be a very, very small amount of data, of information, and then to go off projecting that.
As well as, I'm thinking about that. If we think about that, if that same picture, that same scenario, okay, that the people had to go and write a 10-minute thing from. Then the next day, I was to ask somebody about that. How much more would they enrich that story?
Or potentially a lot. And the opposite too.
So there'll be a lot of changing around in the story. How much little things would they maybe forget and miss out, and then and where their focus would go, maybe on one character or maybe on another. And then maybe if I asked that story again in a fortnight's time, perhaps they could transfer their attention to not the actual picture, but the surroundings that they were in and how they felt about. Maybe if it was the job interview, maybe it was about actually that part's been totally dismissed and forgotten about, and then they're focusing on this. And maybe if they got the job, they could be really positive about it. But if they didn't, maybe it was just really bad, and they could really be feel. So then, if you asked about that in 6 months' time, how is that going to change again? And we've got our memories and how we refresh and update our memories, both with electrical pathways and neuroplasticity, and and our outcomes and behaviors, that when we're re-experiencing something 6 months down the line, if I was to ask him about that picture again, even when he was writing that book, when he was writing that down, it wasn't the experience that he had at the time.
Oh no.
Yet how often do we believe and behave and react and respond and actually impact on our lives? A snapshot that we think we've got, that's a small amount of data that we've changed, a bit like Chinese whispers, changes and changes and changes, and gets turned around. So while there may be some whispers of reality left, the actual full story that's around it has been updated by every mood that we've been in when we remembered it, updated and changed and changed.
And that's one of the biggest realizations for me, any sort of spiritual development practice, is the genuine knowledge that whatever story you're telling, how I'm thinking to myself, is very not my immediate experience. These are so different and yet so easily confused.
Because they seem to be the only reality we have.
The experience, the immediate experience of what you're seeing, smelling, hearing, all that NLP stuff, which is this is the immediacy. You only get this. It's one taste. It's given once, and then the story, the thoughts, my previous experiences. Like, what's her name in that book, How Emotions Are Made? The suggestion is my previous experience of predicting my emotions ahead of time in our dialogue here and now. You know, like checking, is this right? Is this going on? Yeah. I mean, there isn't like a tiny little homunculus Nigel inside that's tapping away things. It's a lovely thought, tapping away in a computer going, oh, well, that looks like this, it looks like we'll do that. That's not the way it is.
And while that's not the way it is, there is, as you say, the intake of all of the sensory information that we've got. So, you know, like I'm smiling at you, you're smiling at me, we're responding to that. And that's going through as well as all of the temperature and the smells and the sounds and whether you can hear me and all of the different information that's being processed at lightning speed in our minds, creating the illusion that what we're saying is completely right. Yeah. That's just how it is, completely and utterly. And we forget, because it's not how it is, we're forgetting that our interpretation is not only, it's not that where of the processing that's going on at the lightning speeds happening. What's being forgotten and pretty much deleted at times from the experience is the fact that our current internal state is also in that. So we might
sure.
We see the sensory information, we see somebody putting out in front of us, we see what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And our internal state, you know, there's that quote, isn't it? That's the brain creates our reality and then says, I didn't do it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, something along it's the mind creates our reality and then says it wasn't me. It's something along those lines. So it denies our responsibility for giving us the experience, and it's just being processed, and something being processed at lightning speed could be a little bit like the sat nav and can get something a little bit wrong as well sometimes.
Yeah. It makes interacting in the world, you know, mostly automatic.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking at the moment when I need to take a breath, or are my eyes dry, or they're still moist, do I need to blink? But now that I'm still not. I'm denying that thought. Thought has now created a boundary and immediately steps over the boundary. That's what thought did. So getting on this idea of meanings, etc.
Yeah.
We've just talked of explored. If anyone watching this, and I hope someone does, several people, millions, thousands, you can always hope. Having watched this, listened to it, etc., you can make your own meanings of what me and Julie are attempting to share. We don't necessarily have any, at least I'm speaking for me, I think I'm for you, but we'll check. Don't have any strong or fixed idea of what we wanted to actually do in this other than share some ideas, bounce off each other the way we do, with, I think, the intention of putting something together that could be useful for certain people.
Yeah. I think the only intention that we actually had was because we had a few rambling conversations when we were out walking and the beach and in snow, etc., because we've done that and the conversations go off at so many different tangents while still having the same thread running through them all the time, even though today's conversation's been different, it's had the same thread all the way through in some context, I believe anyway. And it was about having a conversation online, us doing this, just having that rambling conversation and see what's useful, if anything, for people to ask questions about, to get curious about.
Yeah.
To start a conversation. And, you know, if somebody listens to all of this, well done.
Well done. You may have questions, you may have thoughts.
Yeah. Or some, you know, you might completely disagree with us, and would love to hear that as well, because I've got nothing on, I'm not saying anything with truth, though. It's just a conversation that we're having. We're totally open to being questioned, to being agreed with, being disagreed with.
Yeah.
If you disagree, please share your views on why you think that.
And then we'll tell you why you're wrong.
It's so we can step into your experience. There's no point in saying that. But obviously you will be wrong.
And I salute your sense of humour too.
Hopefully you've got one. So
share it with someone.
This conversation with us, you've got a sense of humour. So yeah, share your views, share your thoughts, share your opinions. Get curious if there's anything that you'd like to, if maybe it just sparked an idea or a thought, or for some people a blog post, or if you're having meetings and helping other people, maybe some conversation. Whatever it sparks, hopefully it will spark something for someone.
And that's what I'm really hoping to get back. Some genuine dialogue, discussion, points of view, different perspectives that I'll find useful. And I know Julie will. So I can see her nodding there. I'm predicting well. Well, thank you for listening to us, Julie. Thank you for your conversation, stimulating, enlightening as always.
Thank you, and thank you for, as always, having me think in different directions. Never have a conversation with you when I don't go and take something away to mull over and think about,
or to sharpen quietly in a corner.
Look at it in a different perspective.
All right. Thank you very much for listening, Julie. Thanks for the dialogue. I'm going to stop recording this now.